Hi, everybody. We are live. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have the great privilege of having Dr. Menije. We just practiced this name, and I knew I was going to blow it, but maybe you can tell us your name and who you are.
Yes. Well, hello, and thank you so much for having me here. I am Dr. Menije. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Los Angeles, California, and I have a private practice. I work with adults, individually or couple, and one of the things that Nathan and I have connected is we both work with OCD. So that's a few of the things.
Yeah, and as you know, OCD, trying to find a therapist sometimes can be pretty difficult to actually find someone who really specializes in it.
Yes, it really is, and it's something that actually after I got licensed in 2014, I went into IOCDF training in 2018. So even for myself, it was something that I went further into training in OCD. So,
and you do a lot of work with, I've noticed with perfectionism is one area, which is a huge, huge deal. And I've seen videos that you've created, and I believe a course possibly that you do. And
yes.
Yeah.
It's something that actually kind of grew over the years, and something I often tell people is that I dealt with my own perfectionism that created a lot of anxiety in me. And it was after reading Brené Brown's book, Gifts of Imperfection, that I come to realize what's behind my anxiety is this feeling like I'm not enough and I'm not doing enough. And I'm sure you have the same experience, that perfectionism seems to show up in therapy a lot behind depression, eating disorders, addiction, OCD. So it also seemed to make sense professionally to talk more about how perfectionism is toxic and how it's getting in the way of our self-love and self-compassion. So yes, perfectionism is something that now became my little work baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is, it's awesome, because if you think about it, we are very competitive in this world and life, and we feel like we need to keep building. And so it's easy to want to be perfect when perfect doesn't really exist.
It doesn't exist. And when people talk about like what causes perfectionism, what's so complicated, I think, is that it does something that starts in your childhood or like your family environment tends to exacerbate it. But now in our current lifestyle with social media and so many filters and never-ending social media apps, there tends to be so much more pressure to look perfect and do everything perfect, whether it is parenting or whatever your occupation is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure they're still doing research on social media and how that all plays into our life and brain and all that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, for everyone that's here, if you haven't been here before, your job is to kind of answer some questions or ask some questions about OCD, anxiety, and we'll do the best that we can to answer them for you. And one thing to know is that this is not therapy. This is not for like, they told us to go do this, now I'm going to go do it. It's more just general advice and information. And I'll pull up some questions that come up on the screen, and I guess we'll just go from there.
Yeah. I didn't actually notice the comment section, so now I see a list of comments.
Yeah. So we've got Joss. I remember you from before. I've had a severe relapse in the past 2 days, and I'm riddled with anxiety all over again. I have no therapist, and I can't afford one. I feel like I'll never be better again. Is there any advice? Oh, man. I know OCD, they say waxes and wanes. Anxiety, definitely. There's some good days, some bad days, and we're really good at remembering the bad days. And I know for anybody, I think I just had a post on this, like, I love the mindset of, whatever people are going through, like, this is just for now. And when it's just for now, that means that I need to do something different to be able to feel better and do, if I don't do anything different, things might stay the same for a little bit. That's the biggest key to me, is knowing that, we tend to do the waited out method quite often, and to see if things are going to get better. And if we kind of say, well, what do I have control over? What can I do to make things better? Because I don't have a therapist to help me out. I know that's why we have, videos to watch, or there's other, you're here asking a question. The first one I have on here, like, I can see you're motivated to figure this out. I say with anxiety, exposure and response prevention is my go-to treatment. And so if you don't know much about that, it's learning all about what you can do and practicing it and doing it over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think one of the first things.
Thoughts on that?
Yes. I first of all, I want to appreciate the honesty and vulnerability. I know it's really hard sometimes to talk about our relapses and talk about the way that we may have had hard times. And I have to say, the first thing comes to my mind anytime I talk to my clients about relapses is compassion. I think we have to be loving, kind, and gentle with ourselves when we have relapsed or regressed, or fell into that urge and engaged in it. And so the first thing that I ask or suggest is compassion, and to be kind and loving. It's one of my favorite dialectical thoughts is, I'm doing the best I can and I can do better. So I think we have to first start with believing and saying to ourselves, I'm doing the best I can, and I'm going to do better, and I'm going to figure out ways to do better because I can do better. And when I think of like anxiety is mindfulness, I think, is a really important emotion. I think you were talking about like the waves. A lot of times, we want to think of like writing those emotions. So those are two, I guess, maybe not only my favorite tools, but I feel like a relevant tools to suggest here is always being compassionate about our journey anytime we're going forward or backwards, and being mindful of emotions and not stick to them, hold on to them. You're not going to be anxious forever.
I love that. You're not going to be anxious forever. I like that a lot. Yeah. It's having that hope for the future, because I think when we feel like we're not going to be able to move forward, then we don't, because we don't do anything different. So a mindset definitely changes quite a bit. Chloe, I have just realized that my lovely therapist has been reassuring me daily since last August, and none of the exposures we did made me anxious. Do I switch therapists? I do love her, but I'm not better. No. My thoughts are, well, it depends on if they are the therapist that specializes in whatever you're going through. If you're doing exposures, it sounds like they might know what they're doing. I always have anyone that I see, they say, I might have great ideas like, hey, let's do this thing. Let's go to a grocery store, let's whatever. And I'll come up with this exposure, and I'm like, I actually don't know if this is going to make you anxious, because you're the only one that knows. And so I always say, be open with them of this thing we just came up with. It doesn't make me anxious. And I know sometimes that's hard to say, because that means you have to come up with something that's going to make you feel anxious, probably. And to be really open as well, of like, hey, I know you're saying everything's going to be okay, or that my relationship's not going to fail, or whatever the reassurance is, just to almost either educate or call them out and say, hey, you're reassuring me. I don't know if you know you're doing this. I only say switch therapists for people if they don't actually specialize in what the person's going through. And I've had people call me out before, like, I don't know if you knew this, but you've been reassuring me on this specific thing, and I didn't even realize I was. And so sometimes it's just good knowledge for the therapist, because each person's so different.
I have to agree with you. I think my to-go suggestion and sometimes I get emails from people that might want to work with me, and they tell me they're working with a therapist. And my very, most important first step is to communicate. I think you have to communicate with your therapist. And I think I don't want to say good versus bad therapist, but a good therapist needs to create a safe space for feedback. So, communicating with your therapist what is working and what's not working, what is helping, what's not helping. And maybe you can also approach it as like, I'm sure, Nathan, you do this, like kind of like a review, right? When we work with clients for over a course of a long time, we want to pause and see how things are going, and are there new goals to address, how much progress we made. So I could also see from that. So anytime people are considering switching therapists, I think the most important thing is to communicate first and have a discussion. And hopefully the discussion is helpful and effective. I think Nathan gave great ideas about giving feedback, because I've experienced also, I've always wondered, like whenever I do ERP with my clients, like half of them get very anxious and the other half of them don't, because it just feels too fake in the middle of, or maybe because I'm just here and they feel like it's all going to be okay because she's here. But so I think sometimes exposures, maybe exposures, like changing the exposures and doing them differently could create more anxiety. But communicate.
Yeah, I love that. That's the word that comes to my mind is communicate. And a therapist, an ethical therapist should be able to tell you, like, this actually isn't something that I really specialize in. Yeah. And that's kind of our job. There's definitely things that come my way, whether it's bipolar or something else. I'm like, I only know so much about it that when we really dive into it, it's not my thing, and I have to refer you to someone else. Yeah. So hopefully they'll be able to do that if that's the case. I've actually made too many horrible mistakes in my life. I hate myself. Please help. And I can tell you, you're definitely not alone in this. This is a huge topic of conversation that at least I have often with individuals. I see it in Facebook groups that, OCD or anxiety Facebook groups that people talk about, like, I've actually made horrible mistakes, so how can I move forward? And I don't know, since you work a lot with perfectionism, and if you have any
that's the first thing came to my mind. I was just thinking how we are all imperfect beings. That's what came up for me as I was seeing the words mistakes in my life, is that we're all imperfect, and with that we are designed to make mistakes. And I know it's hard, and I don't mean to minimize anyone's mistake, because I know that the person who made the mistake, it feels unbearable and it feels very painful. I think that's how mistakes feel. My mistakes feel horrible to me. If I were to tell them, maybe you will be kind and gentle, and your mistakes will seem forgivable to me, but not to you. So I want to be very mindful that the person mistakes feel very painful and heavy. And yet we have to first start from the place of remembering that we're all imperfect and we make mistakes. And not to like jump around, but I think one of the tools I figured we will be talking eventually, and I'm sure you talk about this, is exposures. And I always encourage people with perfection or OCD or other issues, is like we have to like expose ourselves to the things that makes us uncomfortable. So I think there has to be some part of like exposing ourselves to making mistakes and allowing ourselves to be imperfect. Is one of the tools that's coming up for me. And in terms of, allowing the mistakes to define us and allowing mistakes to become a reason where we lack self-love, self-compassion again seems to come to the rescue, where we have to be forgiving and gentle and kind with ourselves, so that again, mistakes are not a reason why I don't like myself. And technically, I shouldn't have any reason not to like myself, because again, my self-love is not conditional. My self-love is something I deserve by simply being here. And so I also noticed that comment about, I guess, mistakes causing the person not to love themselves. And I wanted to also comment on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that comes to my mind as self-compassion for sure. Is, mistakes, no matter what mistake it is, we can learn from any one of them if we want to. And once we learn, we move forward. And if we're not able to move forward, then there's something holding us back. And I know with those, if it's OCD specific, it's really going to stick into someone's mind. And that's where we learn to sometimes change the relationship we have with the mistake that was made. To say, when this story comes up to my mind again, or this thought, I need to respond differently to it. Mm-hmm. Because if I don't, it's always going to be a bad thing. And instead of something that I learned from and moved forward. Yeah. And a lot of people do that through the exposure and response prevention therapy.
And that reminded me when what you just said right now. I think sometimes people think that the only way they can move forward from making a mistake is seeking certainty that they're never going to make a mistake again. And I think that is like half healing or half closure. We want to be able to say, I'm moving forward. I learned what I need to learn from my mistake, and I, may or may not make more mistakes of this level. I may or may not make similar mistakes. I think we have to be careful not to tell ourselves, I'm never going to make that mistake again. Especially in therapy, like with relapses, as someone was saying earlier, like, and I'm thinking about relapse in general term too, like with addiction and other issues. No, we sometimes may repeat the same mistake again. And that's must have been part of our journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love that. Hey, I'm having a psychiatrist appointment for the first time today. Any tips on how to talk about obsessions, sexual or real event for the first time? What should I say? And what can I keep to myself? Oh man, each person is so different. Yeah. I know if it was me, I'd say like, tell me everything, like every obsession, every thought, sexual, doesn't matter what it is, because a specialist will see OCD as OCD, no matter the topic or fear or intrusive thought. And psychiatrist, for them to be able to help you effectively, in my mind, I think I would want to tell them everything I'm going through. It could be general. I have sexual intrusive thoughts. And I mean, that to me is enough to know, like, I kind of know what type of thoughts people are having. But instead of going in and saying, hey, I feel some anxiety, I have lots of, random thoughts, sometimes that's not enough for them to know what they're going off of. So it's being able to kind of explain it. And sometimes that in itself is doing exposure therapy. Is I'm talking about these things and I don't know how they're going to respond to me. And so we can kind of go in the back of our brain saying, they may or may not judge me. I don't know. They may or may not, whatever the fears are. We're kind of taking the threats and saying, this is what I know I need to do to get better. And I'm willing to risk the rest of it by keeping it uncertain. And so maybe not tends to be my phrase, my go-to of take any threat and just say, I don't know, but this is what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm. I actually want to first say, I want to say congratulations or a good job, because I know that seeking medication or consultation with psychiatrists can be very stigmatizing, and it could be for some people, they tend to maybe delay it. So I actually just wanted to acknowledge that, and I just wanted to kind of clap for you here for doing what you need to do for yourself. And I think your motivation or your willingness to feel better shows when you come in here and even prepare yourself for the appointment. It's one thing to make the appointment. And I've had clients where they're just kind of winging it as a way of defense mechanism of like avoiding the discomfort of knowing they're going to have a consultation. So the fact that you're asking, what should I say? How should I maybe summarize given the, duration of your appointment, again, speaks volume of how you're taking this very seriously and that you are very committed. So I just wanted to start with that compliment because I think you deserve it. And kind of what Nathan said is obviously everything he said, plus maybe, again, thinking of time, I would think of like maybe the most recent ones or the ones that are most debilitating, or the reasons that you're seeking out medication consultation can be helpful. Especially, like, let's say, I'm going to make this up, somebody in their 20s are going to appointment 25 and they had OCD since 8 years old, and it can jump around. So something that you dealt with as a 15-year-old may not be very relevant, or not very much what's in the driver's seat today at 25. So I would say maybe start with what is, like you already mentioned, sexual intrusive thoughts. So I'm guessing that's what's in the kind of the forefront right now, the leader of the pack. So you can maybe start with those. I would say what's really right here. And what Nathan said that I really loved is, don't downplay it. Don't say things like anxious thoughts. I've been just, anxious, because it could be misleading that you have maybe generalized anxiety, and you might. But I think what Nathan is saying that I'm taking away is, be more firm with, I have intrusive thoughts, and they're based on real events, or they're related to real events, or they're about sexual in nature that involves children, dogs, this, that. So I would ask, which, as he was saying, it could be an exposure, but I hope that you can be very direct. That's what I would recommend on how to approach such meetings.
Yeah, I love that. If you think of it in the lens of what is interfering in my life, and those might be the things you talk about. Like, I'm having to do this compulsion over and over and over and over and over again. That would be good to talk about, whatever compulsion it is. Or I have to keep asking this person if I'm okay, and I do that 100 times a day. But like, that's important to talk about, those repetitive behaviors, whatever they are.
Yeah.
I'm a somatic OCD sufferer and developed a very strange OCD that prevents me from performing well in sports and weightlifting. Anytime I do a rep on exercise, my OCD kicks in. I've got a second part, and tries to make me feel the rep by disengaging my normal automatic breathing, which is important for carrying out exercise with force. It's really making my hobbies an unenjoyable experience. So I'm just trying to read both parts here, but sounds like breathing. Maybe you said somatic OCD. So it's interesting. I think the first question you said, it prevents you from performing well. Makes me wonder if it actually prevents you, or if it just kind of gets in the way and is, you're really, really, really thinking about either your breathing, from what it sounds like. I know if it's breathing gets in the way, especially with exercise, and because that's just what happens, we breathe heavier and we notice more. Our job is to change our relationship with it. That I essentially don't care if I notice my breathing, if that's the fear. Maybe I'll breathe extra heavy, or I'll breathe extra reps on purpose, so I can pretty much say I don't care the way that I'm breathing right now. It's definitely, it's such an unenjoyable experience. I like how you said that, because I've never met anyone that really loves it and really enjoys it. So some people often go in with a plan, like, I'm exercising, here's an exposure that I'm going to choose to do. Maybe I don't do as well on purpose, if that's a worry. I don't do as well with my exercise. Or I go in and depending on the person, I might count each breath that I'm taking on purpose. Or I might make sure I take really short breaths. It's hard to know for you specifically, but each person has a different thought or fear or threat when it comes to breathing and noticing all that. And so we go in and pretty much not make it perfect. And that's one of the things I look at, is whether it's your body making you think or feel a certain thing, we almost enjoy those feelings on purpose. And say, I love the way that I'm breathing. This is great. Hope it ruins my exercise today. That'd be pretty awesome. And if I talk to it like that, all of a sudden it takes value away from it, versus like, oh, this is so annoying. I can't believe this keeps happening to me. I want to go away. And then I'm going to cue to my brain to keep noticing in those moments.
I really feel like there's not much I can add to this one, because you really said wonderful, wonderful things. I guess so similar to what you just said, a lot of mindfulness comes to my mind and being non-judgmental of this experience. As you've said it wonderfully, that we tend to hyper focus on these experiences because we found them unacceptable, or we again hyper focus on those things. So finding ways to either make them more like, okay, I'm gonna mess up my breathing and I hope I get poor breathing, and finding ways to be mindful of those and non-judgmental and observing those experiences comes to my mind. And I think you gave great ideas on how to do exposure around it, to learn to live with it. And
good. So Juan, sorry that's something you're going through. I know how uncomfortable that is, but we tend to just have faith that things will work out at some point, as long as we take that value away from it. I try to say maybe, maybe not, but my thoughts are urging me to do the compulsion. I can't resist doing it. How do I stop? So, I definitely use the phrase maybe, maybe not quite often, but it's not something that we just use and then that's it. I don't just say maybe, maybe not, and then hope that it all goes away. It's usually, that's my response to staying uncertain with something, maybe feeling anxiety about something, choosing to not fix it. It just helps me stay engaged in that moment. And so if I don't know, if I touched this thing and I said, this is contaminated, and then I put it down and I said, it may or may not get sick, and that's my worry, and that's all I said, like, I might be able to resist it, but it might be really tough. I might have to continue engaging with whatever the fear or worry is on purpose. Yep, I may or may not get sick. I may or may not get sick as I'm holding or I'm touching this thing. And I'm going to resist doing the compulsion by sticking with that long enough. And if I can stick with it long enough, usually there's a point where the brain's like, maybe you don't care as much to go wash your hands. That's just my example. But whatever the compulsion is, we know, we learn from each one. If I gave into it, I learn, hey, what can I do next time about this? And it's definitely hard to do, but maybe, maybe nots are great, but following it with action is good.
I think what's coming up for me is how, as you said, maybe or maybe not is a great technique for us to stop assessing for certainty and analyzing the situation and how likely or how unlikely. And obviously response prevention is, on a behavioral level, help us not to do the compulsion. But I think what might help or add to it is the emotions, because we're supposed to, as we say, may or may not, sit with the discomfort. So I would suggest to, as I think you were saying, like sit with it long enough where you're also leaning into the discomfort. Because between the thought and the compulsion, there is that emotion of discomfort, anxiety, that we also have to learn to accept, lean into, and tolerate. I love that, it's embracing uncertainty and tolerating discomfort are my two significant piece of this journey. So I would say maybe maybe I'm just looking at the question, but I feel like that's what was missing. There's the thought, there's the compulsion. What about the discomfort there? And what am I trying to say? Like, how can you improve sitting with the discomfort, tolerating the discomfort? Mm-hmm. That's where I would go.
Yeah, I love that. Here's going to be possibly a tough one. Okay. I have this condition where I have a strong sensation to move my whole body or various parts of my body, like my hand, my leg, in the shape of a rotating ring. How do I stop this? So when I see this, I think, oh, okay, well, are they tics that somebody's doing? Mm-hmm. If that's something you haven't looked at, that would be my first suggestion, is see if you can see a specialist to see if it's OCD, if it's tics that you're going through. But when somebody feels a really strong sensation, they already kind of know what they're doing. Often I see that possibly as a compulsion. And maybe Somatic OCD, who knows? But ultimately, what I look at is when I feel that urge, just like it were a different compulsion, what can I do possibly different in that moment? And I don't know about you, but I often use sometimes 2 treatments in one, where I might say my job is like if I have the feeling to move my arm, for example, I might do what's called a competing response, where my competing response is to hold my wrist, and it's not like holding it back or anything, but I might hold my wrist and I might change my whole response to it of like, oh yeah, I could totally move my arm, but I'm choosing not to. Or figuring out whatever the threat is if I don't do it. And it's usually I feel uncomfortable. So I'm going to keep feeling uncomfortable. That's cool. I love this feeling. This is great. Hope it stays all day. To say that I don't care about the sensation that I have, and it will go away all on its own. And so I think there's so many different components that could be happening. But the idea is, can I tolerate this sensation long enough for it to, whether it's 5 seconds, maybe I just like focus on 5 seconds before I do it, and I get really good at that, and then maybe 10 seconds and 15. And ultimately, I don't care how long this feeling lasts. It can last forever. Or if I really feel like I have to do it in a certain motion, maybe I completely mess it up. So my body has like no idea what I'm even doing. Sometimes that's what I like as well, to just say, break the rules that my brain is set.
I think you said great ideas. All I can say is that you have a video on that I watched many moons ago that I would recommend people to check out. So
it's good. Pulling this up, I don't know much about it, but maybe you do. Can you explain more about EMDR therapy and how it works?
I guess
I actually don't know much.
No, I don't either. And what I was going to say is in EMDR therapy is what I recommend when a client has PTSD, first and foremost. So not to, get too clinical, but I always tell people, even in, consultations, like there are different interventions that we have researched and studied that we know is best for certain experiences and certain mental health needs. So we, as a therapist, we really want to make sure we're matching the research to what you're experiencing. So for EMDR, it's type of therapy that we recommend for PTSD, not for OCD, for an example. And then the second thing is, if you do need EMDR therapy, I would look for an EMDR therapist. And best way to do that, honestly, is go to their website, because colleagues of mine here in Los Angeles that are EMDR certified, not only I know them because they share that, but also when you go to their website, they have an EMDR therapy section. So those are just 2 things I can say about it. Other than that, I don't know much about it.
I love that. I know when someone comes to me who has OCD, they're like, should I see you or should I do EMDR first? Like, probably not EMDR.
Yeah.
And I know the brain's really good at saying, well, with EMDR, I might not have to feel anxious, and so I want to go do that one. But it's kind of OCD's way of saying, do anything else but exposures. And so I love what you said. Trauma seems to be the go-to when it comes to that. What do you do when you're not afraid of certain exposures but fear others? In my mind, it's probably do the others and figure out which ones are, whether it's a hierarchy that you need to build. This one's not as hard as this one. This one's not as hard as this one. And we stick to that smaller one, and we keep doing that one until it really just doesn't bother you, and then we move to the next. And so if we're doing exposures that don't really bother, they're probably not as effective, in my opinion, because why would you have to do it if it doesn't interfere or bother you? That's it whatsoever.
I guess one thing that I often think about exposures is, and with my clients, like at the end of the day, I teaching them certain skills, embracing uncertainty, tolerating discomfort, and doing exposure. Like I'm teaching them skills. And we tend to start with exposures that are less in anxiety because we want to set them up to succeed, and we want them to feel motivated and inspired and empowered, especially if you've been struggling with OCD for many years. I feel like most people get to a place where they feel very hopeless. They get to a place they feel very powerless. So there's benefits to doing exposures that is not making you afraid or making you very little anxious, because we want to, again, get your feet in the water and get you set up. But at the same time, don't split it like, oh, I can do exposures that I'm not afraid of, and then I can't do exposures that I'm afraid of, because at the end of the day, it's the same skills. You're just, applying them to different situations and different fears. So feel confident that you have the skills. Just because you did, again, small exposures doesn't mean you don't have what it takes to do big ones. They're all the same skills. It's just we put them in order so that we, A, have a direction and we know which way we're going, and B, I often tell my clients to help you feel empowered and strong and motivated. But I hope anyone who does exposure can feel confident that it's your skills that you're taking with you. It's not like, oh, I expose myself to water, or now I'm exposing myself to like different, like, I feel like sometimes people get too caught up in like stories of the OCD and forgetting that you're taking the same skills with you wherever you go, and you can feel like you can trust that.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I often think when we create that hierarchy, it doesn't matter as much if I'm doing a small exposure that causes discomfort and I'm able to work through it versus like the top of the list, because you're learning that skill and you're building the same pathway for the brain to learn that I can tolerate discomfort and I can respond differently to it. And my brain is learning to not care as much about whatever the perceived threat or fear is. And so I get people who are really caught up on like, oh, but I have to get to that number 10 on the list, and that's going to be so hard and I'll never get there.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it doesn't matter. Like, usually I find once we get there, it doesn't even matter as much as you thought it does.
Especially, I think the story I hear is like, because let's say their number 10 item has to do with their loved ones. Like, okay, I can do some contamination exposure, but I cannot do something that involves my dog or my daughter or my son. And again, while that's okay to discuss, I think we have to keep leaning into like, you have the skills to do the exposures that you're more afraid of.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Can voices have something to do with OCD? I wonder if you mean like hearing voices. Yeah. I know there's a specific topic where people are afraid that they might hear voices. But when someone's actually hearing voices, to me, that's not OCD related. That's something else. I know people can have dual diagnoses, whatever the word is. But yeah, when someone worries like, oh, am I hearing a voice? And they're obsessing about that, that's typically what OCD is for me.
I guess the only other, yes. And I guess the only other diagnostic question to focus on here would be, is it like hearing songs? If that's kind of like a musical obsession. But I agree with Nathan. If you're, again, as therapists, when we hear voices, we tend to wonder, is it a auditory hallucinations, which is a different type of mental health illness and disorder. So yeah, I guess those are a few things to look at.
I am agoraphobic. Is there any way to not feel this way? My social anxiety, even around my friends and family, is so bad. So, man, it's so hard. I always feel so bad. So for people who don't know, agoraphobia is kind of just staying inside, kind of essentially afraid of being in the outside world in some way or another. And so I can tell you, like, there definitely is a way to not feel that way. And that's usually through treatment and doing the things we probably don't want to do. And I've worked with many people where we often start with, like, I'm going out, I have my front door open and I'm standing in front of my front door. Like, and that's enough anxiety to like, wow, cause a lot. But I'm not just doing it just to like do it. I'm doing it and practicing that response piece as well of, I'm not saying it's okay that I'm here, it's all right, doesn't matter. We're actually saying like, I don't know, might be okay, might not, but look, I'm at my front door. That's cool. Something might happen. Someone might walk by and want to talk to me. I don't know. We're taking all the threats and keeping them uncertain. And when somebody practices that, I've had people practice that literally for hours a day. They might like camp a chair at their front door, and then it gets really boring, and then they move it to their front lawn, and they move it to their mailbox, and they keep moving forward and get in the mindset of like, I want people to talk to me. Like, I want my family members to call me. And then we get to the point of possibly actually calling them and saying that it's okay that the anxiety is there. It just doesn't dictate what you're going to do anymore. And so I think we tend to see anxiety as such a bad thing when really it feels horrible, yes, but it's not actually warning you of any danger.
Yeah.
Unless you see that immediate threat.
I guess just to add to what you're saying, yeah, I do think that a lot of conversation to be had about like how we are perceiving anxiety, and accepting that we're going to feel anxious when we're doing things differently, especially with agoraphobia and other exposures. I think we have to accept we're going to get anxious, because a lot of times I think our mind is saying it needs to feel easy, or it needs to feel comfortable. If it's not, then I'm not either doing it right, or something is wrong with me. I'm so broken, this is never going to work. So I think we have to surrender that this is going to feel anxious for a little while. You're going to feel very anxious for a little while before it gets better. And then the second tool that I wanted to suggest, I know we didn't talk much about it yet, is, well, I know, Nathan, you mentioned about like, fear being such a force behind our actions. And I think we have to, especially a situation like this, revisit and lean into our values to guide us. And our values, like, my goodness, I'm sure there could be so many different values here, but the few that coming to my mind is connection, fear of freedom to do what you want to do when you want to do it, fear of being out in nature. If when you overcome or recover from this, maybe you want to go hiking, or you want to go in a canoe, or you want to go camping. So I think we have to use our values like travel, nature, connection, family, holidays, trick-or-treating. So I think we can also use your values to remind you why you're going to do something that's going to feel really hard.
I love that. You have a reason to go out.
Yeah.
There's things that you care about.
Yes.
And speaking of values, can OCD make you question your values and who you really are? I'm having these awful thoughts and wondering if they really are things that I want to do. Oh, well, that's what OCD does. It attacks what we value, what we care about. Whether someone's has a new child, or they just got married, or they got a new job, or they are in a new relationship. Like, those are new values in people's life. And OCD loves to come in and like, oh, cool, how can I make you question and doubt all of this? And so it's super, super common, obviously, that this happens. And there is, I mean, if you have read forums or talked to other people, like, this is what they're worried about, that I really am this person, or I really am going to do this thing that my brain told me, or I really, like, I don't know, I'm going to be that person that goes against my values. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that we stay uncertain about, instead of trying to convince you that, like, you are who you are, you've always had your values, nothing's ever going to change. The brain's really good at like, yeah, you're right. And then it just doubts it all over again. That we tend to do exposures based off of, well, maybe I risk this value in some way or another, but we're not actually breaking any values, when, at least how I do exposures, is I don't want anyone to actually ruin their value system, but it might be risking it in some way or another. So if I feel like I'm dishonest, for example, then I might played 2 truths and a lie with somebody, but both of them are going to be lies. Like, I don't know. It's doing different things to make you feel like, oh, I really must be breaking my values, but how can I pretty much act like I don't care about this one? I know a lot of people are worried if I start doing these exposures, I'm actually going to be the thing I don't want to be. And we're going to do the thing I don't want to do. And that just doesn't happen. And so we have to be willing to risk either way.
Yeah. I think you gave great ideas. I think I can just reiterate that, these are very typical way that OCD tends to show up. It latches onto things we value. And I think that can be a reminder that you always have to be one step ahead of it and accept that, when you become a parent for the first time or have a new house, have a new job, it's going to latch onto things you value. And again, as we were saying earlier, your skills are with you. You can use the same skills that you've been leaning into, and just because the thought sounds different or looks different doesn't mean you need a new skill set. I mean, you might need different exposures just to match the thought, but other than that, your skills are always the same. And I always think it's one of the traps of OCD, right? To think that I must be having this thought because, or it must mean something that I'm having this thought. So we want to, again, go back to observing thoughts without investigating them or analyzing them. I just had the thought of blank, and not say, do I want to cheat on my partner? Why did I just have that thought? I thought my value was being faithful. So we have to learn to watch thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Love that. I fear my catastrophic OCD will ruin my life by some event. How can I curb this form of OCD? What's kind of your go-to thing for catastrophes?
I was actually just thinking how the tools we discuss is there more to add to that? Because I feel like it comes back to that, I see the fear and I see ruining my life, and I see both. Like, I think it's the fear of, I think, all OCDs, that it's going to ruin my life. Like, whether you have pedophile OCD or contamination OCD, it's this idea that your life is going to be ruined by some event or the catastrophe, the fear. So I can't help but feel like leaning into uncertainty is our best way to live with it.
I think of like doing experiments, essentially. Like, my brain said, like, actually a week or two ago, they forecasted possibly a tornado coming through our town. And so, like, there's a real threat there, catastrophe. And hopefully we're going on the right catastrophic OCD that you're thinking of. But we literally are just like, I mean, it might happen, it might not. The only way to know is to let it happen or not. Like, that's our only option. And so we continue living, what I say, live your life, not as if the catastrophe is going to happen, but live your life. And when catastrophes do actually happen, we can solve it. And so we say, you think of any catastrophe that's ever happened, like, we solve it, we figure it out, we fix it. Even if it's the big ones, even if a tornado did come through, like, we probably would know to get out of the way. I mean, we do what we need to do when things actually happen. And we live our life until a catastrophe does. Because it's going to be that slight chance where something actually happened, but then we get so much more of just actual life that we get to live.
Yes. Yeah, it reminds me how much our fear can hijack us from the present moment, how much it can hijack us from enjoying things that are happening right now because we're worrying about something that's going to happen at the end of the week or 5 weeks from now. So I really resonate with what you're saying in terms of being present and enjoying life that's right in front of you, than living in the future or in the past. I guess along with that, not to overplan. I feel like a way of calming our fear, anxiety, we tend to over-prepare, over-plan. So try not to maybe engage in that type of urges as well. Like checking the to take your example, checking the news channel or weather channel every hour, every day is unnecessary, because that's just going to feed into the fear.
Right. I think the fear is for a lot of people, I'm going to miss something. And so we risk missing it. And
or I'm going to be irresponsible. Something bad's going to happen to my family because of me being, tolerating those.
So we're just kind of cruising through these.
Okay.
How do I separate myself from my thoughts? Sometimes I feel like if I think a certain way, I have to physically replicate it, even though I know it's not how I really feel. I can have my thoughts, which is often break the rules that our brain has set. If I have to do things a certain way, I'm going to do it completely wrong. Whatever my brain says is not the right way, I'm going to do it that way. So if it says I got to put my right arm up, then I'm going to put my left arm up. Or if I have to tap something 3 times, then I'm going to tap it like 1 time or no times. Like I'm going to break the rules. So it's pretty much kind of making it mad. It's like poking the OCD. Like, you want me to do this? How about I do this? And, I see the threat is like, even though I know it's not how I really feel, I think that's really great insight that you have to know that it's not who you are, it's not what you want to do. And so we usually start somewhere and say, well, that's how we separate it, is accept that thoughts are thoughts, feelings are feelings, but we're not going to do anything with it. And practice tolerating that uncertainty and doing it over and over and over again.
When I hear separating myself from my thoughts, I was taking the ACT tool, cognitive diffusion. I would suggest taking a look into that school of thought. They have really good tools, which always coming back to mindfully observing our thoughts. And that could give you maybe an upper hand to not turn those thoughts into actions when you are watching and noticing and observing your thoughts. Self-distancing is what I would recommend.
Ruminating being the biggest one, how do I make stopping mental compulsions less complicated and confusing? Mainly ruminating. I suffer from ADHD, so it's hard to understand even more. And I'd say rumination is probably one of the biggest compulsions that people probably do. Most people, super common question is like, how do I stop the compulsions, or how do I stop a thought? And that's usually in my mind, like we don't want to stop a thought. We do want to stop the compulsion, which is what you have here. It can be complicated and confusing. Each person I know seems to have kind of their own method of how they do it. What do you say for people with rumination and how to deal with it or what to do with it?
I would just, yes, I think there's so many conversations that we had around rumination, because I think it's one of the most common mental compulsions. And I know a lot of people feel extra stress on how to deal with mental compulsions versus, behavioral ones. And I have to come back to like mindfully observing or mindfully coming back to task at hand. Because a lot of rumination is, I feel like, going back to seeking certainty, feeling like, that they're going to arrive at a place of answer or certainty. So coming back to like, what am I doing? What was I doing before ruminating? Or how can I bring myself, like, how long have I been ruminating? Maybe past 15 minutes. And if you catch yourself at some point, how can you bring yourself back to something more valuable? Again, I'm just going to, like, maybe it's time to have lunch. And self-care and feeding your body is giving it love. So that's how I would tie that to a value. So bringing you back to something you value, bringing yourself back to a task at hand, observing it. And I guess also, changing your thoughts around the compulsion, knowing that compulsion is never going to get me anywhere. It's never going to resolve anything. And I just want to quickly also mention about ADHD. I have few clients with OCD and ADHD, and I recently found some podcast episodes about it. So I would say also, seek support around people that might have ADHD and OCD at the same time.
Yeah. Rumination is problem solving. That's kind of how I think about it. And I think about, can I actually problem solve this? Is there a way for me, is there an actual answer that I can think about and then come up with a good answer that is 100% sure, there's no question about it? And so far, I haven't really found that people can do that. And when they think they finally figured it out, it pulls it all back and says, wait, but what about this thing? And so we kind of just assume rumination isn't going to get you to where you want to be. There isn't an actual answer you can find, which is why we choose to not. And I think that's a big point, is we choose to not. You have all the power to not do it. I know ADHD plays a part in there, but it's hopefully being able to figure that out, whether it's different skills you learn or medication. People do different things. We're getting closer to the end here, but I'm scared when I heard the news about suicide and what happens if I get mad and do suicide in the future. It gives me anxiety. So there's definitely a theme called suicidal OCD, and it's kind of what this sounds like. There's naturally, actually, I would say majority of people, when they hear stories, their brain will come up with thoughts. We all have intrusive thoughts. Everybody, doesn't matter if you have OCD or not. And it might question, I wonder if I'd ever do something like this. And the difference kind of between someone with OCD and without is, with OCD, it's going to say, whoa, because you even thought that must mean this is a really big deal for you. And if mad is the thing that comes to your mind, you better make sure you don't ever get mad. And so that's where I kind of target. I mean, we definitely look through everything and do a full functional analysis, see who the person is, make sure there's not depression, it's OCD, all this stuff. And then for me, I say, well, let's target getting mad. Let's get mad on purpose and see what happens. And it feels absolutely risky, but we know when we're working with OCD, we risk it. And we find time and time again, oh, I didn't follow through with the thing my brain told me I was going to do. And when that doesn't happen time and time again, the brain learns, I'm totally throwing out all these lies to you because nothing's ever happened. You got mad, nothing happened. You got mad, nothing happened. And the brain needs to learn that because we have a thought doesn't always mean it's true and accurate, but we have to teach it that.
I think, this reminds me again how it's okay to know OCD can show up in any shape or form. It could, again, have suicidal thoughts about yourself, homicidal thoughts about other people and places and things, and contamination and sexual orientation. So I think, as Nathan said, we are answering this assuming that this is a type of OCD. I think it's most important to start by acknowledging that it can show up in this way, absolutely, and then doing exposures to what is your fear? Is it about getting mad? Is it about talking about suicide? Maybe you need to volunteer for a suicide, cause. And I think there was a show, something 13. I probably look so. There was a TV show about suicide. Not to it's not a laughing matter, but I'm just thinking of TVs or songs written about suicide, or celebrities that have died by suicide. There are so many ways to do exposure. If again, fear is attempting suicide, fear is getting mad, understanding what the fear is probably will give you a little bit more direction. But first and foremost, not to reassure you, but to educate you, this is a very common subtype of OCD. I think we typically see under Harm OCD. I think I've seen it in some ways.
Yeah, love that. All right. Hopefully we can do maybe 2 more if that's all right. Why people during testing for arousal get arousals. Is it because they force themselves to have physical arousal because of selective attention? So from what I've seen is when we think about arousal or anything sexual whatsoever, it doesn't matter. I'm trying not to give reassurance here, but it doesn't matter who it is, what gender it is, how old they are, how young they are, we can be aroused by anything. And it's just like, we have often used the example of like, don't think of a pink elephant. Like, you're going to probably think about it. And to me, this is the same thing. Like, okay, better not get aroused. And then you're going to be super hyper focused on making sure you don't get aroused. And you're going to notice things that maybe you would have never noticed before. And yeah, that's just kind of what happens to people. So try not to give that reassurance, but when the brain still questions like, oh, but does this mean something? Our answer is like, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And we try not to do testing because that's a compulsion.
Yes.
If we're testing, then we're saying there's a problem. And so, yeah.
I agree with everything you said.
Good. I thought this would be a good one as well.
Okay.
ERP, exposure and response prevention, is heavily advertised as the treatment that you should only do side by side with a trained therapist. And if you try it on your own, you should expect less success. What are your thoughts? Man, I've seen people do it on their own and be really successful, super successful. It's just knowing how to do it correctly. I think that's where a therapist can come into play. But I've had multiple people, who live in different countries or different areas that just don't have access to a therapist, and they watch videos, or I have a course. I know you have definitely some resources as well that like people have reached out to me and said like, hey, this, like I did it. Like I followed kind of the instructions. I learned all about it and I committed myself to it. And I think that's the biggest piece is like, if I'm doing it on my own, am I committing to doing this therapy? And I know for anyone, we often question, am I doing this right in the first place? And I think that's where a therapist can say like, yep, you're doing this right. But yeah, either way, I'd say if someone tries it on their own and they're really committing to it and they're not finding it successful, then I can say like, yeah, maybe a therapist would be helpful in those moments, but a good trained therapist. Have you seen individuals that?
Yeah, I think what I've seen is like I have seen my clients, for example, before they start therapy, they will give me ideas, the ways they tried the ERP. And I always celebrate that because to me, that shows how their willingness that before they were in therapy in their own ways, they were trying to get out of their OCD, zone or comfort or OCD trap. So I think that if you are doing it by yourself, that again, something to celebrate. And I the way I'm reading this is that I'm feeling a sense of like hopelessness that they're going to be less successful. And I would like to debunk that. I don't think that is the idea here, that more successful with a therapist, less successful on your own. And I think what Nathan was saying, there are different ways that therapy can be helpful. Again, it's so individualized, but sometimes, for example, I have found myself in situations where my clients would do ERP all on their own, where in therapy, what we were doing is more like grieving the impact OCD had on their lives and things that they couldn't do. We would have conversation around how to set boundaries with family members, and how to communicate to people in their lives that they have OCD and how they can best support them. So therapists can give other support. And like obviously Nathan said, brainstorm with you if there are moments that you're stuck. But again, the way I read this was just feeling like the only way to succeed is with a therapist. And I don't think that's the case. But I guess, and this is not that you're implying this, but like alone, meaning don't do it in your own head, because OCD is very loud in there, right? OCD has its own ideas. So I think you need to get external help with podcasts, great books, workbooks, worksheets. So I would say, utilize tools to combat that OCD.
Yeah, I love that you said that. So we have so many resources now that can help. And then family, if they're willing to support. Family and friends can help. That somebody who's doing treatment often has to say, hey, this is the thing I'm doing this week. I am not, you see me flipping that light switch. I told you that's something I'm really working on. So if you see me, you need to call me out on it. And like that is using resources to your benefit in a way. And it's keeping you accountable because you know someone's watching in that manner. And so, yeah, I think whether it's online, seeing a therapist, like anyone can be successful. It's just knowing how to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess knowing what you need when you need it, because you might not need therapy initially, or you might need it later on. So being flexible on what you need when you need it.
Yeah. So, well, awesome. Well, there are so many other questions. Like I always wish we can get through, but I think we'd be here for maybe like 3 hours. I love so many people ask questions, but I'm going to try to go through these and try to answer them in the comments the best that I can. And so is there anything that you want to say about yourself or your practice or your resources?
Yes. Well, I want to say thank you, first of all, for having me here and for these wonderful questions. There were so many. I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us. And I would maybe just let people know that they can find me on Instagram. That will be the easiest way to find me. It's my name is the handle dr.menije. And then I do have a course on perfectionism, which they can find all things related to me on Instagram. So I hope stop by, say hi, let me know you were here today, and I would love to connect.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll make sure to link that in the description so you can go give you a follow. And so I appreciate you being here and all you guys that are here, because if you're here, that means that you like want something different in your life. And so I think it's taking everything that you've learned and hopefully applying something if that's something that is your course, whether it's a new mindset or whatever it is. So thank you so much, guys.
Yes, thank you.